investigated every single case. They properly dealt with things in accordance with the policy that was in place, and it is in fact not anybody else's policy, but the policy that has already been set down and approved by the Information Commissioner.
Just one last question. You had to explain this to the parents, didn't you? You spent a day with Jessica and Holly's parents giving an explanation for the way this police force had handled Ian Huntley's case. What on earth could you say to them that could give them any sort of justification for the way you behaved and the way you handled these matters?
Did you apologise, do you think?
Let me answer the question. I have spent a long time with the parents of Jessica and Holly. I am not prepared to reveal anything that I said to them or that they said to me. I have given them the full explanation that I have given you, and I have discussed it with them fully, but I'm not prepared to discuss anything further because their privacy to me is important.
Well, were they satisfied with your explanation?
I'm not prepared to answer any questions in relation to what happened when I spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Chapman and Mr. and Mrs. Wells. Their privacy is important.
Given that you have recognised
can we have one to end?
Given that you've recognised some weaknesses, are you prepared now to apologise for whatever contribution you and your officers have made towards this tragedy? An apology, not saying you're sorry for things that have happened, but an apology for the fact that you had weaknesses in your systems and weaknesses in terms of individual failings.
Certainly, I am sorry that the force had weaknesses in its systems. I am sorry that there were individual failings. However, the fact remains that there was nothing on the system, and there was nothing on the system due to an honest and forthright attempt to be compliant with the Data Protection Act.
But you now know that's too rigid.
Had you tied up the two names, Huntley and Nixon, there would have been something on the file. There would have been a burglary allegation. Now, the head teacher of Surrey Village College has said, had he known about that, which he would have done if you'd done your job properly, he wouldn't have employed Ian Huntley.
It is right to say that there was nothing on our system that was not also available on the police national computer.
But that's because of you, because of your failures.
Can I just put it to you? I mean, you seem to think that with a bit of a tweak, your systems can be made all right. But this was a system which, over successive allegations of sexual abuse against children and rapes, they were never drawn together as, hang on, let's have another look at this guy. And then when a school asks you if it's safe to employ him, you said, yeah, that's fine, no problem, no history regarding this man. Surely that is, you're seriously culpable in the fact that he was employed in a position of trust and so on, and really you should resign.
Even if we ignore the sexual allegations, it would have showed up.
Excuse me, can I have one question at a time? Can I answer your question? As far as the systems are concerned, the systems are fixed. There were issues there that we've had to deal with, and they were recognised early and dealt with. As far as the vetting check is concerned, I make it very clear, and this is made clear by the Association of Chief Police Officers, that there are differing interpretations about what is required by different agencies. We are facing the contradictory nature of two different public policies. And that is a matter for those two particular agencies involved with those public policies to rectify. I can't rectify that. I can influence it, and if there's a change in the law needed, I will support it, but that has to be rectified at a national level.
But you changed your interpretation of the Data Protection Act in that you now feel you are able to retain intelligence.
The interpretation is still there. It hasn't been changed by anybody else. The interpretation is still available. There are still differing interpretations about what it means.
Chief Constable, how would you describe your relationship with Cambridgeshire Police?
There has always been a professional relationship between police forces. The relationship between Humberside and Cambridge is professional.
But it's certainly not friendly after this, is it?
There is absolutely nothing between us, I have to say. I have personally spent time discussing issues with the Chief Constable of Cambridgeshire. We are colleagues, and we remain colleagues.
Would it be right to say that they're very angry about this?
That's not a question that I can answer.
They're not made their feelings clear to you about that?
That's not a question that I can answer.
Can I ask you, you know, all these 10 allegations that you investigated from the Guardian, by the way.
Yes.
Can I ask you if they're on computerised file or on paper or on, you know, with some on computerised files, some on paper? And also where they were stored, which police station were they held in?
Well, as far as that's concerned, everything's on paper. I can't tell you where it is because of the... I have absolutely no idea where all the files are stored.
Chief Constable Paul Stokes on the Daily Telegraph.
Yes.
You seem to be speaking that all your contact with Cambridge came post the arrest on suspicion of murder of Huntley. It was said locally at the time that it was people in Humberside who saw Huntley on the television who drew to your attention of his past. Could you say whether there was any sort of coppers and nouns used in this and whether you had any earlier involvement?
I have absolutely no knowledge about that. I have no information on that at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can draw that theory to a further less relevant pause because we're now eating into our television time. So thank you, Chief Constable.
Thank you.
2 minutes for response.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, that's David Westwood, the Chief Constable of Humberside Police, the area where, of course, Ian Huntley, also known as Ian Nixon, had spent a great many of his years before moving down south to where I am now in Surrey in Cambridgeshire. And the Chief Constable, David Westwood, coming in for a pretty aggressive and intensive grilling there about the whole of the procedures in place for identifying misdemeanors, wrongdoings, contacts with the police, and also the secondary issue of vetting information and intelligence that could be asked for by agencies like an education authority in Cambridgeshire, the sort of information that would have been required by Surrey Village College before giving Ian Huntley a job as a caretaker. And obviously some serious questions being asked. Sky News' Alex Rossi was in there, one of the people asking questions, and clearly it seems to have raised as many questions as have been answered there, Alex.
That's right, Jerry. Protection Act, and it was because of the systems failings that they had in place that this information wasn't necessarily released. Now, the force up here, Humberside Police, are also saying, as protection to them, that because there were no convictions, although there were all these contacts, although there were these allegations of rape, although there were these allegations of indecent assault, although there were these allegations of unlawful sex, because there were no convictions, it wasn't passed on and it didn't find its way onto the police national computer. But as you heard me asking there was an allegation, the burglary allegation, something that Ian Huntley admitted, that was on file. But because Humberside Police didn't tie up the strands when they questioned Ian Huntley in 1999, he admitted to them that he was using the name Huntley Nixon, but they didn't make a note of it at the time. So it didn't find its way into the system. Now, when Cambridge had checked, had they put in the name Huntley and Nixon, they would more than likely have found out there was that burglary allegation. Now, the head teacher of Surrey Village College, we've heard from today, he said had he known about that burglary allegation, Ian Huntley would never have been employed as the caretaker at the school. He would never have been in a position where he could have had any contact whatsoever with Holly Wells or Jessica Chapman. So some very searching questions here for Humberside Police. You heard many of my colleagues here from other organisations also asking whether he'd be resigning as a result of this. It doesn't look like he is. He seemed to evade the question, but it is some very searching questions being asked of Humberside Police.
Alex, clearly there have been some problems. For the layman listening, they're going to be baffled why a man who came into contact with police 10 times over a period of 4 or 5 years should have completely evaded notice when it came to taking up a responsible position. There have got to be a lot of questions asked here, and presumably it is going to be subject to a major investigation across the country as to the whole vetting procedure and this question of data protection. There's obviously got to be a real shake-up here.
I can't give you any answers now, but what I can tell you is that it's absolutely certain that these questions will continue for probably weeks and months to come. Now, why, as you say, did a man who had sexual allegations against him over a period of about 4 or 5 years, very serious ones, why were these always treated in isolation? The police here say they were investigated properly, they went through all of the procedures, and they are confident that they did do their work, they did do a thorough job. But yet the question remains, and this is what people at home will be asking themselves, how did Ian Huntley consistently slip through the system? They'll be asking themselves, where there is smoke, there is also fire. If there are all these allegations, and there is a huge substance of them. I mean, we've talked to a number of people on Sky News who've had dealings with Ian Huntley, his alleged victims, and they've put some very serious accusations about him into the public light. So why did the police force not investigate these properly? Now, they are saying they did a thorough job, but again, there's just the sheer volume of complaints. Why didn't they do something about them? Why didn't they tie them up? Why didn't they see a pattern of behaviour? Now, had a pattern of behaviour been established, it is perhaps possible to say that Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman would still be alive today. So some very searching questions are going to be asked, and I think people are going to want to know that the systems in place are going to be made much stronger. I think that's something that's certainly going to be pushed for over the weeks and months to come.
Alex, thanks very much. I know you're going to try and track down the Chief Constable and see if he'll come and talk to us individually. For the moment, thank you very much. Let's go straight back down to London and the Old Bailey and our crime correspondent Martin Brunt there. And Martin, you were saying earlier that really this afternoon we would start to see some of the central issues at the point of the centre of this being pointed up, and we've seen news conferences being given by the Chief Constable of Cambridgeshire and now of Humberside, and both of them coming in for some very tough questioning, Martin.
Yes, the Humberside Chief got rather more of a grilling, I think, didn't he? But I don't know that anything's been clarified. We knew that these were going to be the issues, and we tried to explain them as clearly as we did, as clearly as we could earlier in the day, but now we've heard from the two chiefs themselves. I'm not sure that we're any clearer about exactly what went wrong, except to say that there is a real mess in the way that forces gather intelligence, and perhaps more importantly how they retain intelligence, and that seemed to be the thrust of what the Humberside chief was saying, that there are no guidelines, but if he admitted anything, I think it's in too close an interpretation of the rules that govern retention of intelligence. And he said during that press conference that every month this information was being assessed, and the implication is that those allegations that were investigated against Huntley simply dropped off the computer. Now, he did make the point that things are complicated in this area because there were no convictions and no cautions against Huntley for those 9 sex attack allegations that would have been registered on the police national computer. So it comes down to relating in intelligence terms, but he said there's a contradiction in 2 public policies, one that says yes, information should be retained for vetting purposes, but under the Data Protection Act information should be removed on a regular basis. He's called for clearer national guidelines, and he said that he would support any investigation into that. But I think the bottom line is, what a mess. And clearly everybody, I think, who's listening to this will say it needs to be sorted out, because the bald facts for anybody who listens to what we've said about Huntley's past or will read it in the papers tonight and tomorrow is that here was a man investigated over 4 years for 9 sex attack allegations. Surely that information should have appeared somewhere. It should have raised flags, rung bells with somebody in that police force, so that there was an intelligence dossier on him that should have been handed to Cambridgeshire Police when they asked about this man Huntley and Nixon, whatever, when he was applying for this job in which he was going to be given access to children. But you know, are you any clearer? I don't think I am.
Martin, no doubt the man who will be asking a lot of questions is the man who's in a way responsible for the police force around the country, Home Secretary, and it was David Blunkett himself who had a comment on this case today just a few minutes ago. Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, it's a terrible case, not least for the families, but also in terms of securing the kind of intelligence, the kind of work from the police that we would expect. And going back to 1995, there are very major questions to be answered, and that's why I've set up an independent inquiry. That's why I've separately asked the Inspectorate of Constabulary to look at the immediate investigation in Cambridgeshire. And I hope that this inquiry, which will be very speedily indeed, will actually both settle the minds of the families, but also put in place any further measures we need for the future.
David Blunkett, the Home Secretary, with a brief comment there on the fact that an investigation will be set up, and it sounds like it's going to have to be a pretty thorough investigation, Martin Brunt, and one that covers quite a number of serious topics that have come to light as a result of this tragedy of Holly and Jessica's murders.
Yes, I'm sure that part of the inquiry will look at the way the two police forces talk to one another in trying to find information about Huntley's background, or the fact that they didn't talk to each other, but it's clear that it will centre very much on the vetting process and why the information didn't emerge about those 9 sex attack allegations. We've heard from Humberside, they say that they've gone back and re-investigated all of them and found that nothing they did at the time was wrong and should have led to prosecutions. They've spoken, they said, to all of the alleged victims, the 9 victims, some of them as young as 12. We've been speaking to one of them, Janine Oliver, who was 14 when she started a relationship with Huntley. Sometime after that, when she was 15, an allegation was made to police by one of her parents about that relationship and the fact that she was underage and having sexual intercourse with Huntley. As we've heard, nothing resulted in terms of a prosecution, but we've talked to Janine and she's explained to us how she was just 14 when she met Huntley.
At the time I found it quite flattering to think that someone of his age would find someone of my age attractive. But now when I look back on it, it's a bit daunting, it's a bit worrying. The police never got brought into it. Social services said that because I was 15, I was coming up to the age where I was old enough to decide for myself. My mum and dad hated Ian. They always did. But there wasn't really anything that they could do, social services said. They had to just stand by me and be there for me, which they were. But he treated me awful, he really did. He had a thing about school uniforms, definitely. And all the girls that he was seeing at the time that he was seeing me, behind my back, was all my age, all underage, apart from one lady. So, yeah, he had definitely an interest in younger people. He used to take care of some young girls, he used to babysit for them and he, really got on with them well, but I never thought anything, bad about it or anything like that. But yeah, he used to get on with children and that, so I could have been one of them young girls, really. It's a scary thought, it really is. And knowing that I've been with somebody like that just disgusts me. I think he's sick, twisted and demented, and that's putting it politely. He was actually married to my cousin, and he knocked her about until she was had really bad internal bleeding and she lost a baby to him. She had a miscarriage. He pushed her down the stairs and he was always violent with her. So yeah, I can imagine if he can kill an unborn child and he has moods like he does, that he could kill 2 10-year-olds.
Some reaction there from an interview that I think shed some light on what Martin Brunt, our crime correspondent, was saying about this history that has now been unveiled of Huntley's past in Humberside. More from Martin later. Thanks very much for the moment, Martin. Let's take you all back to Surham here. And with me is local representative on Cambridge County Council, John Powley, who's been a representative of the people in many different guises for many, many years around these parts, and probably never had to deal with something quite like this before, have you, John?
You're absolutely right, and I wish I'd never had to deal with an event like this, and I've never experienced anything in all my political life, and that's going back since 1967, and I wish events like this had never happened. Indeed, Soham, as a village, as a town rather, Soham wishes it had never happened, and I said on air when Holly and Jessica went missing that if you'd have asked people in Soham what they felt, they would have said events like this don't happen to a little country market town in East Cambridgeshire, but Soham had to come to terms with the fact that it has happened, and they've had to live with this ever since August 2002. They all wish it had never happened, but it has strengthened. I will say this, there was always, and it was very evident when I moved to Soham, that there was a strong community spirit in Soham. That community spirit has carried the town through all the trials and tribulations of, first of all, the search for Holly and Jessica, the subsequent arrest and detention of Ian Huntley, of events since then, waiting for the trial to occur. The last 3 or 4 weeks while the trial has been going on, the community spirit has been strengthened beyond all recognition, and now of course we have the verdict, which I'm sure everybody in Soham will welcome, that Huntley, through the courts, through the judicial system, has been proved guilty of murder of those 2 children and will hopefully never see the light of day again. And I think that is a view that will be reflected throughout Soham at this particular day. Of course, it doesn't end there, and Soham has got to now come to terms with what has happened, and our thoughts should rightly go out to the parents of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Both parents live quite close to where I live in Soham, and I know the local, really local feeling in the 3 streets around my area. I know what people think, I know what people feel, and our prayers and thoughts must go out to those parents. Part of their ordeal is over, but they've got to live the rest of their lives with the fact that their 2 little girls have been taken away from them by this brutal man, and he will now suffer the consequences of his actions.
As you say, I mean, first and foremost, a very human tragedy that's
Absolutely.
affected people here and really touched people throughout the world in an extraordinary way. But the other side of it is politics, the business that you deal with as
Yes.
a local councillor. There will be the politics of the policing of this. There will be the politics, of course, of this question of how did this man come to be a caretaker at a school in a community like this? And there must be worrying questions that you all need answers to.
Well, of course, I have been worried about this, but I know at first hand, because I'm a governor of the village college, that the school behaved impeccably over this. They followed the procedures to the letter in the appointment of a caretaker for Soham Village College. They carried out all the checks that were called for, the CRB checks. They were all clear, and there was no reason that time that the college shouldn't go ahead with the appointment of Ian Huntley. Of course, people are always innocent until proved guilty, and it was quite clear at that time that Ian Huntley didn't have any convictions against him. However, what they were not aware of, and is why they behaved impeccably, was that behind the scenes allegations had been made against Ian Huntley. But of course, there was no reason for the college to be aware of that. They were not informed of that. They were informed that he hadn't got any convictions, and they went ahead with their appointment on that basis. We've now got a public inquiry, and I hope that public inquiry will address the issues that have been raised in the tragic circumstances that we're currently faced with.
But the school, the governors and the staff there who took on this man in perfectly good faith must feel let down in some ways, don't they?
I'm sure they do feel let down. Individually, we all feel let down. The procedures that were currently in place have let us down. They have let down the college. The procedures have let down the parents of those 2 girls. And what we need to ensure is that in the future those procedures are tightened even further. We had the Victoria Climbié inquiry by Lord Laming, and he made certain recommendations which we are all implementing, but it's quite clear that that is not tight enough. We've got to learn lessons from this, and I hope the public inquiry will look into those issues so that those that are responsible for appointing people like caretakers and anything else are aware of any circumstances behind the people that they wish to employ so that they can take the appropriate action. And of course, naturally, the college, if the college had known about this, they would not have appointed Ian Huntley. I know the 3 individuals that carried out the interviews, and I know them personally. They would never have countenanced the employment of Ian Huntley.
Do you, as a governor, and do those others who are involved sense where the failings in the system may have occurred?
Well, I have to make it clear that I'm not speaking as a governor. I cannot speak on behalf of the governors, although I am a governor. But we must be very conscious of the implications of this, to learn the lessons from them so that these events do not occur again. We have to live within the law. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, if only we all had hindsight. And of course we're all talking in hindsight now. Had we have known, we would never have gone along this path. But we didn't know at the time. Procedures were followed which were appropriate at the time, but learn the lessons we must do.
Let's bring it back to the human side, but particularly to the youngsters, the next generation in this town. How well are the schools coping now, do you think? How well are they managing to get past this event in Surham's history?
I know the head teacher of St Andrew's School, Jeff Fisher, very well, as I know the head of Surham Village College, and I know many of the teachers, and I pay tribute to the way the teaching staff have dealt with the problems. We on the County Council set up a helpline, and we've contributed towards the counselling that has been necessary, and our helpline is now open should people wish to follow it. But the teachers have had a very difficult time since August. I don't think it's over yet, because Surham will never ever forget this sort of incident. I'm very conscious of the feelings, but the community spirit that I'm also very conscious of, which has been strengthened, will carry the town through.
Good words. Thank you very much. Councillor John Powley, very good of you to come and talk to us. Thank you very much for your thoughts tonight. And interesting that John Powley, the local councillor, or the representative of the county council here, talking very much about how the young people here are going to get over and beyond this terrible tragedy. And one youngster we spoke to, Natalie Parr, is perhaps as close as anybody to Holly and Jessica. Holly's best friend and someone who spent the day before playing with Holly and Jessica before the events took their lives on August the 4th last year. Let's hear from Natalie Parr and what impact this whole episode has had on her.
I used to think, oh, everyone just says they're gone, but they're not really. They're still here, but then I realised that I had to grow up and I had to believe that they weren't there anymore. Sometimes you don't mean to, but you make pictures in your head and you think how it must have been and how scary it would have been, and then you find yourself upset and then people worry about you. Everything just came on top of you like a great big pile of rubbish, and you're just trying to pick it all off so you can breathe again, and it's hard because it's just everything is always on you and nothing can leave you alone, and your emotions are always high and you just don't know what to do sometimes. Just want to curl up and cry, that's all you want to do. Sometimes, especially at night, I'll go to bed and I'll read a book or whatever and write my diary, and then I'll just lay there and I'll just cry, just to get my emotions out. At first what I did was I actually didn't write Dear Diary, I wrote Dear Holly and Jess, and I was writing it to them. But then I sort of stopped doing that and I wrote to the diary, sort of about how much I missed them and how much I wanted them back. But when I wrote to Holly and Jess, I just wrote about everyday things, about what lessons we had, what strict teachers we had today, and what
essays we had to write or whatever. But then I sort of changed and wrote it in a different way. We also talk about the good times we had with them, and we will say something and we'll say, oh yeah, that is so Holly, or things like that. And then we will laugh and joke about it. But we're not criticising them, we're just thinking about them. I did know her very well. And there was one time where me and Jessica were with her and it was just us, and we were talking to her instead of doing our schoolwork. And so we got to know a lot about her childhood, and about her now, and her supposed wedding that was going to happen. And that was, we didn't think anything of it at the time. And we were in lessons and she would help us and help us bake things, help us paint things. And she was just like an everyday person to us. We didn't realise that actions were going to affect us so much. I hate him to pieces, really. I hate anybody that had anything to do with it. And I personally don't think they should be allowed to stand up and talk anymore. They took 2 people's lives and they've only got 1 life. They can't ever repay for that second life. Never.
Natalie Parr, Holly and Jessica's best friend at school, a very telling testament to the 2 girls who died here in Surm 16 months ago. Well, more from Surm a little bit later on, but right now it's back to Sheila and Mark in the studio in London.
Jeremy, thank you. And to remind you of the headlines, Ian Huntley being found guilty of murdering Holly.
His former girlfriend Maxine Carr was found guilty of conspiring to pervert the course of justice, but not guilty of aiding an offender. She was jailed for 3.5 years.
Well, the parents of Holly and Jessica have spoken of their great sense of relief after the verdicts were handed out. Jessica's father saying he hoped the next time he saw Huntley that the former caretaker would be in a coffin.
I don't know. I couldn't answer. I don't know. You know, just don't know.
Well, I don't think the alternatives were great. So, just a matter of getting through each and every day.
I don't think we had a lot of choice in the matter, did we?
That man's changed everything. I refuse to let him win on this.
I mean, our life sentence started last August. His is only just beginning.
And Humberside Police have admitted a series of failures in the system, allowing Ian Huntley to escape detention on 10 occasions. Human error was blamed for the police not making a note of Huntley's alias after he was suspected of rape.
Well, Ian Huntley may have spent his last days of freedom in Soame, but as we've been hearing, he had something of a history with the police in his native Grimsby. Sky's Mike McCarthy is there, and Mike, indeed, we've been hearing the police defending their treatment of the various allegations made against him. A lot of people still want answers up there.
I think perhaps if you were a layperson listening to that news conference, what might have struck you is how long this list of allegations against Ian Huntley was, and why nobody really put them together to form any kind of opinion about the kind of person that he was. Why the burglary, for instance, that was ordered to be lain on file, why that wasn't revealed when the school in Soame made contact with the police, and through Cambridgeshire Police with Humberside Police. So they still have very many questions to answer, although, as you heard earlier this afternoon, if you were watching that news conference, they did accept that there were systems failures and that there was human error, and if they had noted in their computer that Ian Huntley was using an alias of Nixon, then things might have been very different indeed. Also, I think it's brought to light the kind of world inhabited by Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley. The canon of Grimsby, the vicar of Grimsby, Michael Hunter, has said today that Ian Huntley was the product of Grimsby's subculture, a feckless, immoral individual with little sense of right or wrong and little social conscience. My colleague David Chater has been looking into the background of this couple in Grimsby, and this is his report.
They've been sharing the same penetrating spotlight in dock number 1 at the Old Bailey. But if you piece together the past and the personalities of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr, long before they even met, they shared an upbringing in Lincolnshire scarred by the same emotional turmoil, a past that marked them out as misfits and loners within their own communities. Here in Grimsby, the case has provoked a lot of soul-searching, even feelings of collective guilt, that two of their own could ever have been involved in such a grisly tragedy. Those misgivings in the community have been eloquently described by Michael Hunter, the canon of St James's Church in Grimsby for the last 17 years.
There is, of course, as there is in every big city, almost a subculture of disenchanted people who have been left on the outside, who somehow have never got absorbed into the mainstream of community living and have been on a tangent on the periphery. It could be that these two people fell into that category.
Fellow pupils at Huntley's school described him as the victim of bullying, as someone who sought out the company of young girls in his class, girls he could control.
You could just walk in a common room every day and he'd always be sat there with the ladies and that. I mean, the odd time you'd see him with some of the lads and that, but he mainly used to sit with the lasses, even in classrooms and that. He'd sit at the back with 3 or 4 lasses or something.
Thought he was a bit of a Casanova, I think. But really he was sort of like all the girls who, the popular sort of girls, didn't want nothing to do with him because they saw he was a bit of a geek sort of thing. So they didn't want nothing to do with him, but how can I put it? Sort of like the younger girls thought he was something special sort of thing. So that's probably why he attracted their attention.
But I think it was just his attitude really why he got picked on. Because he had a very aggressive side to him as well.
He kept himself to himself, and he was just a bit weird, a bit strange in sort of like a lonely sort of way.
Huntley went through a string of odd jobs in Grimsby, working at the docks, packing nappies, a stint as a security guard, selling charity scratch cards door to door. It was while he was working at the Heinz factory he got married, but it only lasted a matter of weeks when his wife left him for his younger brother. Then his parents separated and his mother took up with a lesbian lover.
We're just going to come out of that report a little earlier because we can speak now with the Chief Constable David Westwood of Humberside Police. He joins us now live. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon to you. You've just been giving a detailed news conference in which you detailed the 10 contacts your force had with Ian Huntley between 1995 and 1991, yet the checks designed to prevent such people being employed in schools raised no alarms. Just explain to us why that happened.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. You will probably be aware that the Association of Chief Police Officers has pointed out some very serious failings in 2 separate policy areas. The first is the policy under the Data Protection Act that requires forces to wipe off information off their computers. The second public policy is to retain information to ensure that we can vet people where they will come into contact with children and vulnerable adults. In this particular case, Huntley was never convicted and never cautioned of anything. He was investigated and the investigations were in fact carried out properly. But the details of those investigations were wiped off our computers because it was in accordance with the weeding policy under the Data Protection Act.
And
now, until such time as we have a clarity from the government and the Information Commissioner how these two separate policies, these two separate public policies can be reconciled, we are still going to have an issue to be resolved.
And is it your understanding that that practice is widespread across the country, across police forces across the country, that a man who faced rape charges, allegations of indecently assaulting girls as young as 11, having sex with a string of underage schoolgirls, that such a man, where no charges were brought, any details would be wiped off the computer?
Well, this makes the very point. The Data Protection Act means that each of the allegations is wiped off individually, and you would never get to see a string of issues. What we want to see, and the Association of Chief Police Officers is calling for this, is a system which would be suitable for vetting, whereby you will be able to pick up what amounted to a string of unproven allegations in order to take some judgment in relation to employment vetting. There's two separate public policies colliding here, and we really must find a way of resolving them.
So what you seem to be saying is that nothing has changed since the arrest of Ian Huntley, since the incident in Soham in August 2002, and that such a situation could happen exactly the same.
In terms of changing, we found on our own system some weaknesses which we put right, but they weren't the issue that is here. The issue is that there is a difference in what the policy for data protection requires from what the policy for employment vetting requires, and until such time as there are national guidelines, there is nothing for any force in the country to refer to find any way of resolving these issues.
Now, as you know, Home Secretary David Blunkett has ordered an independent inquiry into just these issues, just these questions. You presumably obviously want him to look into these in detail. What advice would you like to give him? How would you like to see things changed?
I'm certainly not going to give advice. What I am going to do is to ensure that Humberside Police cooperates absolutely fully with this. Certainly I would reiterate the view of the Association of Chief Police Officers that says we urgently need some national guidelines on how to resolve the clash between data protection and employment vetting.
Chief Constable, thank you very much for talking to us on Sky News.
Well, in spite of those human and systematic errors which Humberside Police have owned up to, Ian Huntley was caught in spite of the precision which he tried to cover his tracks with. He'd given 5 College Close the ultimate spring clean in order to wash away any traces of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman being there. But using the very latest scientific techniques, the investigation did manage to bring him to justice.
Ian Huntley did everything he could to cover his tracks. But here in Soham and beyond, he left behind a series of forensic footprints that led the police to his door.
These CCTV cameras picked up Holly and Jessica at 6:30 on the night they disappeared. Then nothing until 16 minutes later when Jessica's mobile logged itself off the network. Either it had run out of battery or someone had turned it off.
That single signal the start of a swathe of mobile phone evidence which overnight turned the helpful caretaker into detectives' #1 suspect. Had Jessica been almost anywhere else in Soham, the signal would have gone to the cell site on the town's football field. But Vodafone's records proved it went instead to a mast 12 miles away at Burwell. Mobile phone experts retraced the girl's route for hotspots where the signal jumps to that cell site. Their technology found just such an area, centred on Ian Huntley's house.
It was a fantastic coincidence that just outside Ian Huntley's house was an area served by this remote cell site. This allowed us to pinpoint the point where Jessica's phone was turned off.
A search of Huntley's phone records revealed more. They showed he took a call at 3:16 p.m. on the day after the girls disappeared. That call signal registered with Ely Water Tower South, placing Huntley in the town. A fingertip examination of his car soon proved why. Huntley had guessed that in each tread of his tyres there was still telltale soil evidence. He got all 4 of them changed at this Ely garage. It didn't help. On the side and underside of his car, forensic geologists found earth from the area where the girls' bodies were dumped. Closer inspection of the soil revealed it was made from an unusual material, making the match even more compelling.
Chalk contains very tiny fossils that allow us to date the rock almost precisely. We could tell that it probably came from a strip of land about 350 metres wide, stretching from Cambridge to King's Lynn. Now over that area, it's almost entirely covered by soil, so we could say that the chalk had to have been dug from some kind of excavation and then spread on a track where the car could have been driven over it.
From the undergrowth emerged more conclusive proof. Teased out of the ditch by botanists an array of pollen evidence. They took samples of 64 different species of plant from the area. From each, scientists collected and logged tiny grains of pollen. Then Ian Huntley's clothes and shoes were scrutinised under a high-powered microscope. On them, invisible to the naked eye, the botanists found specks of pollen which matched those in the ditch. There was one more silent witness to Huntley's crime. In the Forensic Science Laboratory at Huntingdon, the latest matching technology revealed vital fibre and DNA evidence. Scientists used tape to recover surface fibres and debris from clothes belonging to Huntley, Holly and Jessica. 77 fibres from Huntley's curtains, carpets and clothes were found on the girls' Man-U shirts alone. A number of tests were used to prove the match.
The first one gives us an indication of the colour of the dye from an instrument's perspective. The second test allows us to precisely identify the type of fibre, and then the third test splits the fibre dye into its component colours. If the fibres match on all of those tests, then we're fairly confident that those fibres actually come from the same source.
Huntley had spring cleaned his house, but by the time police stripped it back, fibres had been found everywhere. These photographs document the rooms. 12 fibres discovered on the carpet, 2 on a bath mat, 2 in the bedroom cupboard, 1 on Huntley's jacket and 1 on the bedroom duvet. Amongst the girls' clothes they also found 5 hairs. DNA analysis proved at least 2 were Huntley's. Desperate to destroy evidence, he'd cut each item of Holly and Jessica's clothing from their bodies. They were found wearing only their necklaces. This one was Holly's, a chain bearing the word love. But it wasn't emotion that finally caused her killer to change his story. It was the overwhelming weight of evidence against him that left Huntley with little choice. Just days before the trial began, he admitted the girls had died inside his house. But nothing here can tell Holly and Jessica's parents how their daughters were killed. There is only one person still alive who knows what really happened in number 5 College Close. Rachel Ammett, Sky News.
Well, during those hot, tense days in the late summer of 2002, cameras and correspondents from around the world descended on Soham. Sky's Jeremy Thompson was one of them at the helm of Sky News coverage, and he spoke to many of the people most closely involved in the case, including the parents and the police. He also came face to face with Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley.
They seemed fine, very cheerful, happy, chatty, just seemed like normal, happy kids.
Ian Huntley's seemingly innocuous words were to come back to haunt us all. The girls had been missing for 4 days when I first arrived in Soham, and you could already feel the growing anxiety and fear in this small country community. Gone were the friendly faces I'd remembered so well working here many years before as a trainee reporter on the Cambridge Evening News, covering the parish council and local football matches. By August 2002, Soham was a town in trauma. Police officers and those now familiar posters of Holly and Jessica in their red shirts were everywhere. Closed-circuit TV footage of the girls' last walk past the sports centre was released to jog fading memories. At that time, we all felt there was still some hope. 1 week on and things were looking pretty desperate though. The police investigation seemed to be stalling, so we tried to establish a detailed timeline of the girls' last movement from the sports halls through the village college and here to College Close, and in particular we came to this house, number 5. We wanted to speak to the caretaker at the school, Ian Huntley, the last man to have seen the girls alive. Now today his house is completely boarded up after over a year of detailed forensic work by the police behind those doors. But that day, Ian Huntley walked out of the front door past his red Fiesta, shook hands with me, and we had a chat. He seemed a slightly wary, troubled man. He had very dark rings under his eyes. But even then, I still had no suspicion at all that he was to be the killer.
Seemed fine, very cheerful, happy, chatty. I didn't see anything untoward, nobody hanging around. You know, just seemed like normal, happy kids.
Safe and well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you may, as it turned out, have been the last person to actually chat to them before they vanished.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
And it's a mystery
Absolutely,
still not
yeah.
solved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody around here, I mean, I've been speaking to a lot of people, and what they're saying is, you know, while there's no news, then there's still that glimmer of hope, and that's basically all we're all hanging on to.
And there was nothing that Sunday evening that gave you a glimmer of suspicion that anything was wrong?
No, not at all.
Minutes later, I interviewed Huntley's girlfriend, Maxine Carr, right here in the main street, live on Sky News. Once again, I had no reason to suspect her of any wrongdoing. You knew the girls. What were they like? Tell us a bit about them.
Lovely, really bubbly girls. They're ever so funny, they're brilliant, they're kind to everybody. They wouldn't say a bad word about anybody. And they love their families and everything, which is why nobody believes that they would ever run away. They was very close to all their family.
Tell us something about this card you hold.
This with a poem on the inside, saying to a special teaching assistant, really. And
11 days is a long time. I mean, if they could see you now, what would Maxine Carr say to Holly and Jessica?
Just get on a phone and just come home. Just come home. Or if somebody's got them, just let them go. Doesn't matter where you let them go, as long as you just let them go and let them come home.
It struck me as slightly odd that she referred to the girls in the past tense, maybe just a slip of the tongue. That evening, Huntley and Carr went to a community meeting at the village college. They'd been showing an unusually keen interest in the case. The next morning, Holly and Jessica's parents bravely faced the world to make yet another appeal for help to find their little girls.
And you just hope, on all hope, that everything works out.
One person at least already knew that appeal was in vain.
In the last few minutes, a 28-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman, both from the Soham area, have been spoken to by police officers and have agreed to give witness statements to us. They have both been taken to police stations elsewhere in the county for that purpose.
The names, of course, were Huntley and Carr. Suddenly everything fell into place. I began reporting live from outside their home as the police began their search for evidence. We replayed the interviews I'd done just 24 hours before. Now they had much more meaning and menace. A suspected murderer and his lover. Later that night, the police released them. I had Maxine Carr's mobile phone number, so I gave it a call and managed to speak to both her and Huntley. They seemed very strained, very distant, didn't want to say much. But they said they were okay and that they were pleased to be back together again, didn't know whether they were going to be talking to the police. But within a few hours, they had been arrested in connection with the murder of Holly and Jessica. Though there was still no sign of the girls. Then, that bright summer Saturday, came the news we'd all been dreading. This lovely summer's day has actually become darkened by the tragedy of what's unfolded in the hours of today. The latest information we received, the discovery of two bodies just outside the huge American Air Force base at Lakenheath, just about 10 miles to the east of where I'm standing here in Soham. Later it became clear that Huntley had made the drive across these lonely fenland roads with Holly and Jessica's bodies in the boot 2 weeks earlier, before most of us even knew that they were missing. It's hard to imagine what must have been running through Ian Huntley's mind as he drove down this remote fenland track and then dumped the bodies of two 10-year-old girls in this nearby drainage ditch. If it hadn't have been for a drop in the water levels in that ditch and a chance discovery by a local gamekeeper, Huntley might have got away with it.
They seemed fine, very cheerful, happy, chatty. You know, just seemed like normal, happy kids.
And what of Soham today? Well, let's return there now and shoot to the Town Council joining us there. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. And the difficulty is you'll want to put this all behind you. Your vicar, Mr. Alban Jones, describing today as a watershed, but you will still want to and need to remember the girls.
Yes, yes we will. I think that is always going to be in our thoughts, remembering the girls and remembering what the families have been through and what they will be going through in the future.
How do you think that ought to be marked? There was one question asked of the families at the news conference about whether there should be some kind of memorial, and obviously the house will be pulled down. Have you had any thoughts on what perhaps could be put there?
Not really, and I think that is really down to the families and what they feel they want for their children to be remembered. That is something I think the community will have to listen to the families and really see what they want.
I hope we can still hear us, Sam. We've just got a little bit of interference on the signal there. What does Soham actually need now? You've had the media, our presence there for all these months, and of course still being reminded of that today. Is it that you just need to be left alone now to try to come to terms with what's been happening?
I think so. I think, yes, I think that is what the community needs, and I think that's what the family needs. Yes, for everybody to go away and us to try and get on with our lives, to try and move on in whatever way we feel we can.
Well, will that happen though while there are still unanswered questions as we've heard today about the way the police had acted, the fact that Ian Huntley was allowed to be amongst you without the checks being made, and then perhaps vital clues being missed, and the very fact that it took so long to find him?
I think there's lots of questions to be asked, and they will be asked for the future. And those people that are involved with the organisations where these questions need to be asked, the police, the investigation that should go on to find out why.
And we're just going to interrupt you now. We're just going to a news conference at the college.
Okay, I gather you're all doing them live, so shall we start?
Yeah.
Okay, shall we start with Jeff Fisher, Head of St Andrews?
I'd like to express my sense of relief that a verdict has been reached and that justice has run its course and been seen to be done. The last 15 months at St Andrews Primary School have been extremely difficult for all those involved with the school. But nothing can compare with the difficulties and the horrors that have been faced by the two families of Jessica and Holly. And our thoughts today are with them, and they will continue to be so. We as a school have tried over the last 15 months to keep things as normal as possible and do all the things that a school would normally do for the sake of the children, because they're our future. And we shall continue to do that into the new year. Thank you.
Okay, I too would wish to express my relief in the verdict today and to thank the jury for their work. Again, like Jeff, I'd wish though, well, it's a chapter finished, just remember the pain and anguish of the families who have been an inspiration to all of us in the community over the last 15-16 months with the way, the dignity they've shown and the courage they've shown. I welcome the announcement from the Home Office today of an inquiry into the circumstances of Mr Huntley's appointment, because clearly if I had known what is now put in the public arena, he would not have been appointed to Soham Village College. And I'd like to pay tribute to the staff and the pupils of the college for their resilience, professionalism and the way in which they maintained business as usual during what have been exceptional circumstances for any school.
Okay, whether you got any questions, just briefly.
Lucy Manning, Channel 4 News. Can I ask you, what are your feelings at the knowledge you now have of Ian Huntley's past and background?
Well, when I first was briefed on it, I felt physically sick, to be honest. When I realised the background of the man that we'd appointed and the fact he'd walked around our school for 6 or 7 months.
What more things do you think need to be done? What changes need to be made?
Well, that's why there needs to be a review. At this point in time, I don't know the reasons for the intelligence not being passed, and I'm sure the review will bring that to light.
Would you blame
I'm angry, but not with any agency or individual in particular. As I say, there needs to be a review, and the review needs to find the answers.
Mr. Fisher, Stephen Chittenden, Radio 5 Live. Have you told the children of Holly and Jessica at school what's happened today?
No, with the age of children that we've got, we felt that it wouldn't be suitable for them to be told by us in school. We felt that it was far better for them to be told by their families when they got home today. As you can imagine, most of our children are picked up from school by their parents at the end of the day, and we felt that was the most appropriate thing.
And it's a relief for you?
Pardon?
Is it a relief for you today?
It is a relief. It's a relief that justice has been done. It's been a long process, a dragged out process, and we are genuinely relieved with the families that a verdict has come. I'd like to echo Mr. Gilbert's thoughts in terms of the staff. I think the staff at St Andrews and the parents have been remarkable over the last 15 months in the way they've supported each other for the benefit of the pupils.
What do you think of that Maxine Carr's sentence?
I can't really comment on that. That's the sentence, that's the law, and I don't make the laws.
Okay, is that all? Great, we need to move fairly quickly because we've got a very tight schedule of one-to-ones over at the caretaker's house, but you can obviously ask more questions then. And it's in your interests to keep to the schedule, otherwise you'll annoy everybody else. And it's about 15 minutes each. Great, let's head over.
They're the two head teachers who've been so closely involved over the last 16 months, just walking away down by St Andrew's Parish Church in Soham. On the left there, Howard Gilbert, the principal of Soham Village College, the man who employed, in all good faith, employed Ian Huntley as a caretaker. And on the right, Jeff Fisher, the head of St Andrew's Primary School, the school where Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman had been attending until last summer. Good evening. You are watching Live at 5 on Sky News on the day that Soham saw justice for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Ian Huntley was found guilty of their murders and given 2 life sentences. He had shown no mercy, said the judge, and even now, no regret. Tonight, the government launched an inquiry into failings which allowed Huntley to work as a school caretaker, despite a long history of sex attack allegations by girls. Sky's Michelle Clifford was in court for the verdict and the reaction.
Sheer relief was etched on the faces of the parents who for 6 long weeks have had to control their emotions in the face of the most harrowing evidence. But today tears flowed as the man who murdered their daughters was condemned as cruel and merciless and sentenced to life behind bars. But any relief is tempered by the fact that they may never know how their daughters died.
There's only one man who can answer that question, and whether he has the guts to answer that question publicly is down to him. I mean, our life sentence started last August. His is only just beginning.
They thanked those responsible for bringing the girl's killer to justice, and then a brief moment for 2 mothers to remember their daughters.
Loud, noisy, and a real tomboy. And that's it, really. Happy, no worries, just enjoying life. I'm just always happy, always smiling.
Even as the verdicts were delivered, the families of the 2 murdered girls maintained the extraordinary dignity they've displayed throughout the trial. After 17.5 hours of deliberations, the 7 women and 5 men of the jury took their places in an utterly silent court 1 after the judge had told them he'd accept majority decisions. Huntley and Carr stood together in the dock. As the foreman of the jury replied guilty to the charge of murdering Jessica Chapman, her parents remained utterly quiet and still. Huntley blinked but showed little reaction. Seconds later, as Holly's family heard the word guilty for a second time, her mother simply bowed her head. Her father nodded. It was Holly's brother Oliver who betrayed his emotions, letting out a broad smile. The families then listened as Maxine Carr was found guilty of conspiring to pervert the course of justice. She nodded her head as the verdict was given. Huntley and Carr were then taken out for a brief period. As they were led from the dock, Holly and Jessica's parents locked eyes on the murderer. They were clearly struggling to contain their anger. It was only when the pair had disappeared from view that the members of Holly's extended family broke down in tears, crying and hugging one another in the courtroom. Huntley and Carr were then brought back in for sentencing. The judge, Mr. Justice Moses, told Huntley to stand and then said to him,
Ian Kevin Huntley, on August the 4th, 2002, you enticed two 10-year-old girls, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, into your house. You murdered them both. You are the one person who knows how you murdered them. You are the one person who knows why. You destroyed the evidence, but you showed no mercy and you show no regret. It is plain that once you killed one, you had to kill the other in your attempt to avoid detection. After you had murdered them both, you pushed their bodies into a ditch, stripped them and burned them while their families searched for them in increasing despair. Your tears have never been for them, only for yourself. In your attempts to escape responsibility in your lies and your manipulation up to this day, you have increased the suffering you have caused two families. But it is not just those two families whose lives you have sought to destroy. Your crimes are those for which the community suffer. There is no greater task for the criminal justice system than to protect the vulnerable. There are few worse crimes than your murder of those two young girls.
After being given 2 life sentences, Huntley was then led from the dock by prison officers. Carr then stood up and the judge addressed her, saying,
You had plenty of opportunity to refuse to persist in a course of lying and deception. You chose not to. Your intelligence and strength of mind could have been used to ease the suffering of those families, but they were used to compound their misery. If you had had the slightest true regard for those girls or their families, you would have told the truth, and the detection of your partner might have been more readily achieved. Your selfish concern for yourself and Huntley led you to lie all too readily and all too glibly.
Mr. Justice Moses then paid tribute to the girls' parents. He said their suffering could not be imagined, but they deserved respect and admiration for the way they'd conducted themselves throughout the trial. He added, Your loss, your tragedy, is a loss and a tragedy for us all. The girls' families had to listen to Huntley's lies from the witness box during the trial. Lies he rehearsed in the hours and days after he murdered the 10-year-olds.
Can you give me your full name and address, please?
Ian Kevin Huntley, 5 College Close, Soham.
In this police interview before he was charged with the killings, he was attempting to deceive and mislead investigators desperate to find Holly and Jessica. At times he lost his composure, his knee trembling, his words barely audible. The officers who saw through Huntley today condemned him as a ruthless killer.
On Sunday, August the 4th, last year, Ian Huntley carried out one of the most wicked crimes imaginable. The verdicts of the jury mean that he will pay for his actions for the rest of his life. Having murdered Jessica and Holly, he did everything in his power to evade capture. Ian Huntley is a dangerous man. He is a calculating and callous child killer. Only he knows why he murdered Jessica and Holly. Perhaps one day he might demonstrate some sliver of humanity and explain why he did what he did that terrible day last August.
The former lovers, now convicted criminals, were driven away from the Old Bailey separately to begin their prison sentences. The parents of Holly and Jessica hold out little hope that someday the man who killed the girls will abandon his lying ways and tell the truth about what he did to the 10-year-olds. They will simply have to learn to live with not knowing. Michelle Clifford, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Only now that the trial is over can we reveal how Ian Huntley had been questioned many, many times about allegations of sexual violence. His youngest accuser was just 12 years old. So why was he allowed to work at a school at all? And after Holly and Jessica disappeared, how did he manage to evade suspicion for just so long? Undoubtedly, there were police mistakes, as our crime correspondent Martin Brunt explains.
By any judgment, Ian Huntley should never have been given a job as a school caretaker. 2 police forces bungled the vetting of his background, which would have revealed that he was a violent sexual predator. Although Huntley had no convictions, police computers held vital intelligence that showed an appalling and recent pattern of behaviour. All of it was missed. In a 4-year period, Huntley was investigated over 9 sex attack allegations. August 1995, he's accused of unlawful sex with a 15-year-old girl. Less than a year later, the same accusation is made, again by a girl of 15. May 1996, Huntley is again accused of unlawful sex. The alleged victim is just 13 years old. The same month and the same accusation, this time with a girl aged 14. The following year, it's alleged that Huntley indecently assaulted a 12-year-old. And in April 1998, he's questioned about raping a young woman of 18. A month later, there's another rape allegation. This time he's charged, but it's later dropped. In February 1999, he's again accused of rape, the victim's 17. And again in July that year, his accuser is another 17-year-old, and it's Maxine Carr who provides him with an alibi. Staff at Huntley's local social services investigated the 5 allegations of underage sex, but he still managed to avoid prosecution. When Huntley applied for the job at Soham Village College, he admitted that he sometimes used an alias, Ian Nixon. Cambridgeshire police accept their initial checks on him were done only in that name, Nixon. But they insist that when they faxed Huntley's local Humberside force for any criminal intelligence, any suspicions it had about him, they did ask for both names to be checked, Nixon and Huntley, and were told there was nothing known about either name. Humberside police are adamant Cambridgeshire asked them to research only the name Nixon, not Huntley. All records of the fax exchange have been shredded, so neither force's actions can be verified. As they searched for the girls, Cambridgeshire police again asked Humberside for any background information on Huntley and were still told nothing known.
There are some questions that need to be answered. There is an investigation underway by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary as to the circumstances. I think there are real issues regarding the retention of intelligence, balancing that with the rights of individual through the Data Protection Act, communication between different constabularies.
In the early days of the Soham investigation, Ian Huntley was certainly behaving oddly. That was demonstrated by his numerous encounters with police officers in the town. They recalled them during the trial, yet at the time appeared to have missed obvious clues. As this Sky News reconstruction shows, on the first night's search, Sergeant Pauline Nelson was astonished to discover that Huntley had seen the girls, but he hadn't reported it.
I pointed at him and virtually shouted, "You here!" He came towards me. I asked him why he hadn't told a police officer. He said he didn't think it was necessary.
The next night, PC Russell Goldsmith met Huntley and they talked about their dogs.
He said that he play fought with his dog. He pointed out some scratches on his left cheek, 3 vertical scratches about an inch long on his jawline.
2 days later, an assistant at the sports centre, Claire Norton, solved a mystery that had baffled the police. She said she saw Holly and Jessica in the reception there on the evening they disappeared. CCTV cameras, she thought, must have picked them up outside the building. The tapes from the security cameras were studied by 2 police officers within hours of the girls going missing, but they failed to find any images of Holly and Jessica. Yet Claire Norton was adamant that the girls must have been captured on that film. And when she did check the tape, she spotted the girls walking across the car park. The next night, at his home, Huntley talked to another detective, Tim Cleary. The caretaker quizzed the officer about DNA and mobile phone technology.
He was very upset. He had watery eyes at various points during the conversation.
He smoked as if he was nervous or something like that. We talked about the Minnie Dowler and Sarah Payne cases and the internet grooming of children by paedophiles.
The detective in charge of the case defended his officers.
What we saw and heard about in court is probably 0.1% of the totality of information that was in the system at the time that the investigation was ongoing during those critical 2 weeks. Huntley was very cunning, manipulative. He gave this false alibi. As we've seen, it was supported by Maxine Carr. He deployed a number of tactics to put us off the scent, if you like, and he was successful, but only for a short time.
Cambridgeshire police say they had scores of local sex offenders to eliminate and some erroneous sightings of the girls that wasted their time. But more than anything, this was a small rural force simply swamped by what became a massive inquiry. Some observers believe it could prove a watershed and herald a major reorganisation of Britain's 43 police forces.
Like many small forces, they were just overwhelmed by the seriousness and the volume of information that was coming into them. And I think what it really flags up is now's the time for government to have a careful look at this and see if there's not a way of producing a regional response so that small forces are not just reliant on their own resources, that they can call in experienced officers. People have had the intensity of experience of major investigations.
Cambridgeshire police defend themselves by reminding their critics that Ian Huntley was arrested within a fortnight of the girl's disappearance, and they built a compelling case against him. There is no suggestion that seizing him any quicker would have saved the girls. Holly and Jessica were dead within hours of their abduction. Yet for nearly 2 weeks, their killer Ian Huntley was able to destroy evidence, lie to TV cameras, and, in the words of one of the trial lawyers, to run rings around the police. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
The Chief Constable of Humberside Police, which dealt with the sex allegations against Ian Huntley, said the force had investigated their contact with him. David Westwood said there'd been some systems failings and elements of human error which allowed Huntley to slip through the net.
Under the system then in operation, it was the responsibility of Cambridgeshire Police to check the police national computer. It appears that Cambridgeshire Police only checked the PNC against the name Nixon. They would have found no trace. We have no way of knowing for certain whether or not Cambridgeshire Police asked us to check our criminal intelligence system against either name. At that time, no records of such requests were kept. What we do know from the audit of our criminal intelligence system is that no checks were made by our staff against the record of Huntley, and we have no record of a Nixon, therefore there is no audit trail available on the computers. In any case, at the time of the Cambridgeshire vetting check, there was nothing recorded on our intelligence system about Huntley over and above that available on the PNC. This was due to the weeding policy in operation to ensure compliance with the Data Protection Act. We have learned from the past and will ensure that we do everything within our power, permitted by law, to retain relevant intelligence about those who may pose a threat to others.
Let's go live now to Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt at the Old Bailey. Evening, Martin. It sounds like these two police forces, Cambridgeshire and Humberside, are not only at each other's throats at the moment over what they're being accused of, but they have some very serious questions to answer.
They certainly do, and I think one of the great ironies of this whole mess is that when he had contact with both police forces, Ian Huntley was honest enough when he applied for the job and when he asked to look at his records with Humberside, he was honest enough to say he had been using both names, Ian Nixon and Ian Huntley. An error at some stage when, in dealing with Huntley on one of these allegations, he told them both names and they didn't make the link, they didn't write down and make the connection between the two. I think the more important of these issues, of course, is the question of the vetting, and Cambridgeshire police saying we asked Humberside for intelligence on him, and Humberside saying, well, our system was wrong and we didn't have anything and we told Cambridgeshire that. That's going to be the issue that will be explored more fully by the inquiry that David Blunkett has announced. But I think they're also going to look to in some degree at the way Cambridgeshire police handled at least certainly the initial stages of the investigation, when those of us who sat through court thought there were officers who gave evidence who had the most obvious clues that pointed at Huntley as a serious suspect, clues that were completely ignored. But as we heard from the Chief Constable of Cambridgeshire, he's comfortable with the way the investigation went. He says that within 13 days they'd arrested Huntley. He was soon after that charged, and today we've seen him properly convicted of the 2 murders. There's a lot more to explore, I think, and certainly, as you say, these 2 police forces, although they've maintained decorum on camera, I think they are at loggerheads with one another.
Martin, thank you very much. Martin Brunt at the Old Bailey. Much more from him in this hour. But on Live at 5 now, a little bit of a different look at what has happened and what's been revealed in the hours since the verdicts. There was much the court didn't hear about those 2 people in the dock. Just who are Huntley and Carr? David Chater has been putting the pieces of the jigsaw together.
They've been sharing the same penetrating spotlight in dock number 1 at the Old Bailey. But if you piece together the past and the personalities of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr, long before they even met, they shared an upbringing in Lincolnshire scarred by the same emotional turmoil, a past that marked them out as misfits and loners within their own communities. Here in Grimsby, the case has provoked a lot of soul-searching, even feelings of collective guilt, that 2 of their own could ever have been involved in such a grisly tragedy. Those misgivings in the community have been eloquently described by Michael Hunter, the canon of St James's Church in Grimsby for the last 17 years.
There is, of course, as there is in every big city, almost a subculture of disenchanted people who have been left on the outside, who somehow have never got absorbed into the mainstream of community living, and have been on a tangent on the periphery. It could be that these 2 people fell into that category.
Fellow pupils at Huntley's school described him as the victim of bullying, as someone who sought out the company of young girls in his class, girls he could control.
You could just walk in a common room every day and he'd always be sat there with the ladies and that. I mean, the odd time you'd see him with some of the lads and that, but he mainly used to sit with the lasses, even in classrooms and that. He'd sit at the back with 3 or 4 lasses or something.
Thought he was a bit of a Casanova, I think, but really he was sort of like all the girls who, the popular sort of girls, didn't want nothing to do with him because they saw he was a bit of a geek sort of thing, so they didn't want nothing to do with him. But how can I put it, sort of like the younger girls thought he was something special sort of thing, so that's probably why he attracted their attention.
But I think it was just his attitude really why he got picked on, because he had a very aggressive side to him as well.
He kept himself to himself, and he was just a bit weird, a bit strange, in sort of like a lonely sort of way.
Huntley went through a string of odd jobs in Grimsby, working at the docks, packing nappies, a stint as a security guard, selling charity scratch cards door to door. It was while he was working at the Heinz factory he got married, but it only lasted a matter of weeks when his wife left him for his younger brother. Then his parents separated and his mother took up with a lesbian lover. Over a period of 4 years, police and social services investigated a whole series of alleged sexual offences, including against underage girls. He was accused of raping a 15-year-old schoolgirl in this road known to locals as Gas Alley. The charges were dropped, but he had to spend time in a bail hostel. His girlfriends remember his violent fits of temper.
I thought I was pregnant to him like 3 or 4 months after we'd been together, and I told him, like, because I thought at the end of the day he had a right to know, and he punched me in the stomach and I went flying on the bed. So I said to him, what was that for? And he went, you're not having no kids to me.
He was actually married to my cousin, and he knocked her about until she was had really bad internal bleeding, and she lost a baby to him.
In 10 minutes' time, The Bill. But before that, an ITV News special with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Ian Huntley is tonight on suicide watch in Belmarsh Prison in South London after receiving 2 life sentences for the murder of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. He's been checked by a doctor, fed, and is now in a single cell. A CCTV camera trained on him and a prison officer sitting outside his door. Today, the judge told Huntley, you showed no mercy and you show no regret. Huntley's former girlfriend, Maxine Carr, was jailed for 3.5 years for lying to the police. From the Old Bailey, Colin Baker reports on the dramatic end to a trial that has gripped the nation.
The city is stopped to give safe passage to a child killer. Not an escape deterrent this, but a protective screen for a double murderer. A killer of 2 young children leaving the Old Bailey to begin 2 life sentences. In court number 1 today, there was evil, and its name was Ian Huntley. Ian Huntley murdered Holly and Jessica. He killed them, he dumped them in a ditch, he stripped them and he burnt them. And then he went up to Holly's father and said, I hope things turn out okay. But never, not once, did he turn to the parents in court and say, I'm sorry. After such cold cruelty, it seems there should be more to say, but nothing will bring back the lives he took or heal the lives he shattered. Referring to Holly and Jessica, Mr. Justice Moses told Huntley, they were happy, intelligent and loyal. They were much loved by their families and all who knew them. You murdered them both. You are the one person who knows how you murdered them. You are the one person who knows why. You showed no mercy and showed no regret. Turning to Carr, the judge said, if you had the slightest true regard for those girls or their families, you would have told the truth.
Only he knows why he murdered Jessica and Holly. Perhaps one day he might demonstrate some sliver of humanity and explain why he did what he did that terrible day last August.
Their first ever press conference was 16 months ago, when they were desperately appealing for help in finding their girls alive, hope which lasted less than 2 weeks. There can be few journeys more painful than the one travelled by the Chapman and Wells families since the night of August the 4th last year.
I think it was a time bomb just ready to go off, and unfortunately our girls were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I don't think there's any more need to be said about him, except the only thing that I'd like to say is that the next time I have to see him is like we saw our daughters, and that's in a coffin.
Mr. and Mrs. Wells and Mr. and Mrs. Chapman now know who killed their children. They know where and they know when, but it's probably too much for them to hope that one day Ian Huntley will tell them why. Colin Baker, ITV News at the Old Bailey.
Over the last 30 days, the jury at the Old Bailey has heard the chilling evidence of how Ian Huntley lured Holly and Jessica into his house in Soham and then brutally murdered them. But the jury was never told the truth about Huntley's past. He's a man with a long record of involvement in sex crimes, many of them involving very young girls. No one in Soham knew anything about his secret history, but they should have done. Paul Davis reports now from Huntley's hometown of Grimsby.
We will probably never know what turned Ian Huntley from the young boy here on the right enjoying a day at the fun fair with his brother into the man who preyed on young girls. But we do know there were many warning signs in the behaviour of Huntley the adult. No one passed those warnings to the authorities in Soham, but they could have. They could have, and many will feel they should have. Because here in Grimsby, Ian Huntley's taste for young girls was well known. He was never successfully prosecuted, but we can now reveal that he was linked to, and in many cases was the main suspect, in a whole catalogue of sex offences, all of them involving young girls. In 1995, when Huntley was 21, he was investigated for underage sex with a girl of 15. In 1996, social services investigated another allegation of underage sex. In May that year, another claim, this time the girl was just 13. Later that month, yet another allegation of underage sex. In September 1997, Huntley went on to indecently assault an 11-year-old neighbour. Police decided there was not enough evidence to charge him with the attack. In February 1998, he was accused of raping a 17-year-old girl he'd met at a nightclub in Grimsby. In April, another nightclub-related rape allegation by an 18-year-old girl. In May, an 18-year-old woman was violently raped after meeting Huntley at a nightclub. And in July 1999, a 17-year-old girl said she too was raped by Huntley as they walked home from a nightclub. His girlfriend at the time, Maxine Carr, gave him an alibi. Time after time, Humberside police investigated Huntley, but as he was never convicted of any crime, they saw no reason to warn anyone in Soham when he moved on. Not all of Ian Huntley's victims went to the police. Rebecca Bartlett was 17 when she lived with Huntley. She says he was violent and cheated on her with girls who were even younger.
Yeah, he definitely does like his young hands. Because he knows that he can tell them what to do and they won't say no. Well, maybe they didn't say no. Because like I didn't, when he was telling me to do things, I used to do it because I was scared.
A girl just 11 says Huntley took her to this orchard in Cleethorpes and subjected her to a sexual attack that lasted more than 3 hours. An 18-year-old girl claimed Huntley followed her from a Grimsby nightclub into this underpass where he viciously raped her. Yet again the investigation was dropped, leaving Huntley free to move on. Now that Ian Huntley's trial is over, there remains in his hometown a feeling, an uncomfortable feeling, that there were warning signs in his past of what this man could be capable of. Warning signs that could, indeed should, have prevented the dreadful things that happened in Soham. Paul Davis, ITV News, Grimsby.
Well, in the light of what's emerged today about Ian Huntley's past, the Home Secretary David Blunkett launched an inquiry into how he was able to get a job at a school. For their part, Humberside Police apologise. Their Chief Constable David Westwood admitted mistakes by his force had helped to let Huntley slip through the net. The story of how Cambridgeshire police built their case against Huntley is one of quite astonishing forensic detective work. As the evidence mounted against him, the caretaker continued to lie. Police video footage even shows him feigning mental illness. That meant the prosecution case had to be watertight. Harry Smith reports now on a remarkable police investigation.
Can you give me your full name and address, please?
Ian Kevin Huntley. College Close, Soham.
Thank you, Ian.
Under questioning, Ian Huntley told police very little, claiming he had a complete blackout about the killings. Throughout this interview, his leg constantly twitching, he played the role of a mentally ill man who couldn't be held responsible for his actions. Doctors who examined him disagreed, but while he remained silent, detectives turned to forensic experts to trap Holly and Jessica's killer. This is Huntley's house, videoed by police just after his arrest. It had been cleaned from top to bottom. This is how it looks now. The fabric of the building has been taken apart and removed for forensic examination. This is the bath in which Huntley said Holly died, and the doorway where he said he killed Jessica. More clues came from the girls' distinctive Manchester United shirts, which were found in a dustbin in the school where Huntley worked. The spot where the girls' bodies were dumped in this ditch brought more vital clues, including a strand of Holly's hair caught on a twig. Another piece of the puzzle slotted in when Maxine Carr admitted she'd lied to give Huntley an alibi.
And when I found out that he was the last person to see them at that time, to speak to them, I just didn't know what to do. So I'm sorry for wasting time and all that.